Up from our last discussion, 2 chapters ago, we were talking about sort of the sequence of events in American history. One person we had mentioned, especially politically, but really hadn't gone into a lot of detail about, was Andrew Jackson. And so in this section, we're going to deal with, for the most part, 1830s, 1840s political history. A little bit of some other stuff, but a lot of this is going to be governmental. And it is sometimes referred to as the age of Jackson. You know, Jackson is such a sort of towering figure in American political history that he's kind of a watershed moment. And we'll see that really until the end of the 1800s almost, you've got Jackson and his systems of sort of political activity are going to be the sort of the dominant factors in American history. A few things like sort of the two-party system that we have today with Democrats and Republicans are very much going to be, for the most part, a product of the age of Jackson. So we're going to be dealing with this. We're also going to be seeing that the states are going to be continuing to kind of tear at each other. We're going to have another one of these sort of crises of the Union as this goes forward with South Carolina. We're going to have one in a series of government-caused crashes in the U.S. economy here in the 1830s. And we'll get to talk about politics and campaigning and how this all sort of works itself out in the mid-1800s. Well, Jackson was somebody who took things really personally. And in 1824, when he runs for president of the United States, he is, by any sort of measurement, he's the most popular guy that's running. And he gets, the most votes, and he figures he's going to win. But because he's got 3 other competitors for electoral votes, he doesn't get the majority. And it goes to the House of Representatives, and sort of then you've got the backroom dealings or whatever that take place here in 1824. And Jackson winds up coming out on the short end of the stick. And John Quincy Adams in 1824. And really, he referred to it as a corrupt bargain. He thought he'd been kind of cheated out of what he thought was his rightful place in the executive mansion. And so basically for 4 years he's going to run for president again. And he is going to be joining up with sort of the nascent formation of the Democrat Party. Along the line, and the way that he sort of rationalizes this, and you've got a lot of people sort of forming the Democrat Party for various reasons. You got Martin Van Buren, who wants to, we need to get people into power to help stifle the problems with discussions of slavery that are going to rip the Union apart. So we need to put some people into place to do that. And you got some other people who are in the Democrat Party for less than honest reasons. And of course, Jackson, the appeal of the Democrat Party is that there's going to be a nominating convention, there's going to be a lot of organization, and this is going to be the national group that's going to push me over the top in a way that I couldn't do it in 1824. And that's what's going to happen to him. His nickname was Old Hickory, for those of you who don't spend a lot of time chopping down trees. This is the reason for this nickname is because if you did spend a lot of time clearing land, which a lot of Americans did, more so then than today, hickory tree bark is, and the flesh of the tree is really, really hard. And so if you're going to try to chop it down with a hand axe, the idea is basically he's a big tough guy. And the myth isn't too far removed from reality. He was tall, he was grim, sort of graven looking. He took things very personally. If you crossed him, whether it was you insulted his wife, which some of these people on his cabinet and in the social circles of Washington would do, this is how he took things. He nursed lifelong hatreds of people, whether individually or sometimes in groups. And he moved to Tennessee as a young man. He had served in the Continental Army in the American Revolution. He and his brother were captured very late in the war, and as they're being sort of marched off, and they're going to head off to sort of prison camp, this British officer informed Jackson's brother, "You have to polish my boots." And of course he said, "No, prisoners don't have to do that." And of course Andrew Jackson, he complained as well that no, they wouldn't have to polish your boots. And of course the British officer took out his saber and went to cut him. Jackson tried to protect his head from being cut with a saber because, saber cuts on your head aren't a whole lot of fun. And it gashed his hand and his arm, and it was a scar that he would bear for the rest of his life, along with a burning hatred for basically all things British. Moving to Tennessee as a young man, he learned to, he was self-educated, he learned to write, but he also became something of an accomplished duelist. By at least one count that I was reading, supposedly Andrew Jackson killed at least 12 men in duels. So, anyway, this is Andrew Jackson in the dueling culture of sort of 1800s Tennessee. He would eventually get himself into a judgeship, elected to Congress, and serve as a general in the War of 1812. The Battle of New Orleans was by far his most famous of all of these engagements, but it was really successful in a lot of other areas as well, putting down the Creek Indians during the War of 1812, and then also coming down to Florida and dealing with the Seminoles in the First Seminole War. Now, the common folk loved him. A big part of Jackson's mystique is the way that he is put forward to people politically. And you see this is now par for the course for political campaigns, that image and voter identification, I'm one of you, that kind of idea. Jackson was really the first one to have a massive kind of cultivation of that by people that were working on his campaign, because he works hard and he's one of the common people clearing the land. And the reality was that he was a rich guy. Okay, he was a wealthy slave owner. He was not like most people in America. And in fact, he didn't have a whole lot of love for the common man. He thought that he was kind of a lot better than everybody else. And a good example of this, these two sort of levels, the mythical political animal of Jackson and then the real Andrew Jackson, you can see in his inaugural party. If you're a Democrat, right, and the idea of Democrat is a Greek word for power to the people. And the people elected me, the people want this. And so what he did was, for the inauguration party, he opened the White House to the public. And basically anybody that wanted to come in and have a wild time with Andrew Jackson at his inaugural, you could have it, right? Now, of course, Jackson actually slipped out, and he went and had sort of expensive food and champagne with some close advisors, exactly like you would expect a really, really rich guy to do. He wouldn't want to hang out with sort of the common people. But the common people trashed the place. They had a massive party. It nearly wrecked the White House, and they were sort of ripping the plaster off the walls. They were worried at one point that it was going to burn down. They were dancing on the tables. It was a good time. And the only way that they were finally able to get people out of the White House was they told them, all right, there's more beer outside. And so they all ran outside and then locked the doors. So this is Andrew Jackson. Give you an idea of kind of what he looks like. Some of his major military campaigns, one of them takes place here in Florida. He is the first governor. He was the first military governor of Florida. And this is an artist's rendition of the scene at the White House, which was then still just a two-story executive mansion. These people sort of having a wild time. Their horses kicking and people dancing and having a grand old time. And of course, Jackson had long since left because he didn't want to hang out with these people. One of the traditions of the executive branch that had begun by Washington and had been maintained through John Quincy Adams had been, well, you show moderation when a new party or a new political class comes into the White House. You don't go around willy-nilly just firing people for their political views. If you are a Federalist and then Thomas Jefferson comes in and he says, okay, I'm not going to fire you people, just as long as you do what I say, that'll be good enough for me. There'll be a few of you, the key people, that I'll let go. But for the most part, if you do your job, I'm not going to get rid of you for those reasons. And of course, the president had some, he had some jobs to appoint, in Washington and around the nation at various federal jobs. Well, we saw what happened when we were talking about John Quincy Adams, who maintained that, yeah, all right, I'm not going to fire people, I'm going to show moderation. But by then, a lot of people said, wait a minute, we had to work to get you elected. You didn't win the election on your own. We had to kind of engineer it in the House of Representatives. Where's our payback for this? And so it really cost John Quincy Adams a lot of political support, whether you agree with that or not. And so when Jackson comes into office, he was pretty clear with, no, the people that got me elected are going to be the ones that are going to be in. The people that didn't are going to be out. He basically canned almost all the political appointees. He's going to kick these people out of office. So, who are you going to replace them with? You fire all these people. How are you going to find replacements? Well, what's your determining factor? That is people that are loyal to him and helped him get elected and helped the other Democrats get elected. Very, very basic. Jackson prized loyalty much, much higher than he did ability. What that means is we're going to have sort of two views on this, all right? On the negative side, you're going to have some bad people that are going to wind up in positions of power, all right? You're going to have some scoundrels, some people with some shady past, and not a whole lot of reason to be put into these jobs. You're going to find a few illiterates. One of my favorite things to read about during this period is a number of people who were judges that couldn't read. And you even find some out-and-out crooks. Right? These are not just people that, they may not be the most trustworthy, but no, they're actually, thieves and people that are dishonest. And a lot of these people are going to make it into the offices of public trust of the Jackson administration. Jackson, for his part, though, he defended this. He defended this move as inherently democratic. People elected me because they wanted my people in there. And to be fair, too, Jackson, some of the people that he was firing had been in there, a couple of them, I think, had been in there since like the Washington administration. They were drawing a paycheck, they were drawing breath, and that was about it. And so he wanted to get the old people out, and he wanted to bring new people in. He said that's the purpose of elections. And you don't want to have this old sort of entrenched bureaucratic class, so you get rid of the old and you bring in the new. So that's the rationale behind this. Now, one of our major constitutional crises is going to take place here with South Carolina during the Jackson administration. And the first one of these, all right, the first one of the three sort of major ones, was the Alien and Sedition Acts with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions to nullify that law. And then sort of nothing happens with that. The second one of these is going to be dealing with the Tariff of Abominations, as it was called. One state attempting to nullify a tariff that they don't like. And of course, the third one of these is the southern states basically throwing their hands up and saying, all right, screw it, we're going to leave the Union, secession. And of course, that leads to the war between the states. So this is sort of part 2 of 3 of kind of testing the waters of, well, how tight is the Union? Now, we had talked about tariffs before, and all these tariffs are taxes on imports. The North, which had more manufacturing, generally favored them. The South, which had to go to the store and buy finished products for the most part, did not like them because they didn't care where they came from as long as the prices were low. And so a very large tariff had passed in 1828 before Jackson took office. And it made tariff rates pretty high. Southerners did not like this. They cried to the federal government, they cried to their guy Jackson, who was a Southerner and was taking office, and we need some relief. All right? Northerners, they really liked this. It was protecting their industries, their businesses are growing. The South, though, they feel is the federal government is really abusing its authority to come down and just hammer them, economically. So Jackson really took it upon himself to say, okay, I'm going to take on the Congress. We're going to work through a different tariff. And so for the most part, through his first term, he's going to work to try to reduce the tariff. But it's tough sledding. All right, it's tough sledding because you got a lot of people that, even if they're not on the sort of north-south divide with this, there's a lot of money coming in from the tariff, and they don't want to make these changes, especially because it gives them money to play with in the federal government. And so you've got a whole bunch of factors. I'm trying not to make this too complicated, but basically by the end of this process, Jackson managed to get some concessions. He managed to get some modifications to this tariff that was so horrible. But generally speaking, the tariff remained relatively high. All right, so into this, all right, is a South Carolinian named John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun is one of our more attractive political figures. He was a good-looking guy, unlike some of the people that are, ridiculously ugly in political office. John C. Calhoun was still Vice President of the United States at the time, but he's looking at this, and he's a South Carolinian, he's a Southerner, and he's also in the federal government, and he's been in the federal government for a while, and he's at a crossroads where, do I side with my state, which is sort of being crippled by this tariff, or do I go with the power of the federal government? Because it's getting to a point where I can't sort of ride both horses. It's to the point where I need to choose. And so he decides on his home state, and he says that, listen, I have a plan for this. And basically John C. Calhoun's plan is the same as Thomas Jefferson's idea about this, that this horrible, or in his opinion, in Southerners' opinion, this horrible law is out there. How do we get rid of it? Do we not have any power as states? And so, even though he's still Vice President of the United States and he's sworn to uphold all federal laws, he gets to South Carolina legislature and he says, listen, you guys declare the tariff null and void within South Carolina. and it goes through the South Carolina legislature, and they say, okay, yeah, that tariff, that's unconstitutional. We're not gonna collect the tax here in South Carolina. South Carolina is not going to follow the law because it is so ridiculously horrendous. And while that might be kind of a sentimental favorite, we can see how this is going to lead to a whole bunch of problems, because basically any state can just say, yeah, that law we don't like, yeah, it doesn't operate here. And so then federal law isn't really federal law. So this is a major, major problem. There's John C. Calhoun. Look at that hair. Look at that chin. Way to go, John. Well, the problem with this is that South Carolina really picked the wrong president to mess with in this regard. Had John Quincy Adams been president at the time, you almost certainly would have gotten a radically different outcome than what we're going to get. And to put this into perspective, you've got to understand something here that that is about Jackson and how he operates as a person. When he sort of wounded by the British in the American Revolution, he hated the British as a result of that. According to a lot of accounts that I've read, supposedly he had a strong hatred for Indians because of his campaigns against the Indian tribes. People who had personally crossed him, he hated sort of for the rest of his life. People that he felt were not in the best interests of what his government was trying to do. And he developed a sort of personal hatred for him. One episode kind of puts this all into perspective. Okay, Andrew Jackson was the first president to have an assassination attempt against his life while he was in office. Lincoln would be the first person to be assassinated as president of the United States. But Jackson was the first person that we know of that's documented that somebody tried to kill him while he was president of the United States. And all of this happened, Jackson, he's out for a walk, around the mall, and we sort of think of Jackson kind of as he's pictured here on the money, and he's just this tough guy, and he's a general, and he's fighting. But by the time he was president, he was getting on up there in years, and he actually would walk around with a cane. And so he's kind of this old guy. And this guy, steps out of the sort of misty fog of a Washington morning and pulls out this pistol and says whatever it is you say, we're going to assassinate a president. And, of course, this causes an immediate stir with the people around. Now, we don't really have Secret Service, like you do now. Obviously, you don't have little earbud radios that you can kind of talk back and forth. But you also don't have kind of a network of people all around the president ready to just jump in the way if somebody shoots at him, or get him into a nearby carriage or something like that. You got a couple of people that are kind of looking after the guy, but it isn't really all that well organized. And it would be much, much later until you finally get the Secret Service that you and I would kind of understand that they're there to protect government officials, along with a bunch of other stuff that the Secret Service does. So you don't really have that. And in fact, the Secret Service guys that were with him, they did what you and I would do, which is, hey, there's a guy with a gun. Ah! They kind of flip out. Jackson, on the other hand, doesn't flip out. He immediately starts stumping his way towards the guy. And of course, the guy, blah, 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 and he pulls the trigger, okay, and you get a misfire. Click. It's, for those of you who don't deal with black powder weapons, any little bit of moisture can cause this thing to not fire. You can also get it to where the flint will cause what's called flash in the pan, where it'll ignite the initial charge, but not the main charge in the barrel, so the bullet won't go anywhere. So whatever happens with this guy, he pulls out the pistol and click, nothing happens. Well, he comes prepared because he got a backup pistol, because he's probably used black powder weapons before, and he knows that there's a strong possibility that this thing is just not going to go off. So he pulls out this second pistol, and now, of course, Jackson is steadily coming towards the guy as fast as his little old man legs will carry him. And, of course, he, at this point, is at point-blank range. I mean, the guy could probably have turned his head and still hit Jackson. And he pulls the trigger again. Click. Another misfire. At this point, Jackson pulls his cane up and beats the man down into the ground, because he's Andrew frickin' Jackson, and that's what you do. Even if you're president of the United States, you beat this guy senseless. All right. He apparently breaks his cane over the guy's head, and when I hesitate to call them Secret Service, but when the government aid people manage to kind of get their act back together, and there are a bunch of other people around at this point too. They have to pull Jackson off of his would-be assassin, and according to one account, he's still kicking and spitting and cussing at the guy. This is the president that South Carolina decided to say that the law that he had signed was unconstitutional on their own authority. Not the smartest move you can make. Now Jackson, for his part, he was not a fan of the tariff. He was a Southerner. He understood what their beef was with it, but he said that, look, I had gotten the best deal I could get from Congress. I did the best I could. We will work to get it in sort of fixed up again in the future. But like it or not, it's the law of the land. And he viewed South Carolina's actions as basically a personal attack on him. Well, I don't think so. Right? So Jackson is going to react with this. He begins gathering an army, and he prepared to lead it as commander-in-chief down to South Carolina. And according to at least one account, he was overheard to say that he was going to hang John C. Calhoun from the nearest tree. Now, you get some other presidents of the United States, they get sort of mad, politically, and then you sort of yell at each other, and you say things in the heat of the moment that, you might not mean. When a guy like Andrew Jackson, though, says that this guy, John C. Calhoun's a traitor, and I'm just going to find him and I'm going to hang him from the nearest tree, you better take it seriously. You might actually see President Jackson hanging John C. Calhoun from a tree. Okay, so we've got all the testosterone flowing. I mean, this is like a pro wrestling pay-per-view at this point, right? The Union decided, though, that maybe a war of all the states versus South Carolina was not such a good idea, right? Because in part, Jackson, while extremely popular with most of the people in America, wasn't overwhelmingly popular with some people, especially in the Congress. And one of the things that they didn't want to see happen was Andrew Jackson to rack up another impressive military victory, go and just beat the stuffing out of South Carolina, and pictures of him standing there next to John C. Calhoun's body hanging from a tree behind him, because it would just make him that much more of a war hero, as president. And so they didn't want to give him the sort of the political prestige that would come with that. And then, of course, there's the idea that, hey, what we're about to do is bat insane. Okay, let's not do this. And so Congress is going to pass a bill that would gradually lower the tariff over 10 years in return for South Carolina rescinding its nullification. And so the Union is safe for the moment, but again, we've got a very ominous precedent. Now we've got the second one in a string. Virginia and Kentucky nullify a federal law. Nothing at all happens to these guys. South Carolina nullifies a federal law, and it gets what it wants, an eventual lowering of the rate. It doesn't have to say, we're just going to have to grin and bear it. We'll send our Congress people to Washington, and they'll have to, work to reduce this through the normal political process. No, they threaten nullification. And while there's, some back and forth about whether or not they're going to get invaded by the federal army, they get what they want. This is only going to serve to encourage other states to consider the same kind of action. Now, one of the other major problems that Jackson is going to run into is the plight of the American Indians, especially the ones east of the Mississippi River. And what we're going to see throughout this period of the 1800s is basically the same as what we'd seen in the 1700s and on through the 1600s, and that is settlers continuing to push in sort of a westward direction for the most part, except here in Florida. It was north to south rather than east to west. But what you're going to see is the frontier is generally being pushed westward, and you've got sort of wild territory where Indians can kind of do whatever they want, and then east of that you've got settlements, you've got civilization, at least what these people would refer to as civilization. And generally speaking, the westward movement from the 1600s, 1700s on into the 1800s had been a pretty uniform kind of thing, but by the sort of the early part of the 1800s and the mid part of the 1800s, some of these Indian tribes had managed to create some pretty stable civilizations of their own, and some of them had pretty well assimilated into certain life patterns that were pretty familiar to a lot of Americans. And many of these waves of settlement, in fact, had taken the path of least resistance. And instead of forcing tribes, like the Creek or the Seminole or the Cherokee or the Blackhawks, out of the way, it was easier to just kind of go around them. That's Indian land, we don't really want to settle on it, and so, yeah, whatever. What that also meant was some of these Indian tribes now were pockets, where they were basically completely surrounded by settlers, and this is a pretty dangerous situation for these guys. Compounding this problem, for example, with Cherokee Indians in northern Georgia and the western Carolinas up in the mountains, gold is discovered, and that immediately is going to bring in settlers. But basically, all of these places are now looking to be ever increasingly attractive to American Indian settlers. And all these states are going to try to move these guys out of the way. Now, a lot of these Indian groups really weren't, kind of the wild and free, sort of rampaging Indian, kind of mythology that you may have in your head. By this point, the best example or best counterexample of that would be the Cherokee, who, they were sending guys to school. They had their own written language. They had their own newspaper. This is not, these are not the activities of people that are sort of, living in huts and, hunter-gatherer lifestyle. I mean, they had farms, and so. The Indians do what most civilized people would do when an action of the government threatens their rights and liberties, and that's they sue. They sue in court. Okay? Eventually this works its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I'm cutting out a lot of the legal process here because it's pretty turgid kind of stuff. But it goes up and then it comes back down, and then it goes up again. And so anyway, the end result of this is John Marshall. John Marshall is still the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court under Andrew Jackson. And now by this point he's like Yoda old. But still, he's in the Supreme Court, and they listen to the case, and John Marshall sort of rallies the court and says, the Indians, they've got their rights, and you can't just, because you feel like you want their land, that you can take it. So we agree with the Indians that they should be able to keep their land with this. But we're going to have one of those fundamental disagreements with the judicial branch versus the executive branch, in that the Supreme Court makes its decision, but it has zero number of armies to enforce it. The president, on the other hand, has exactly one army more than that. And so this was not the decision that Andrew Jackson wanted. Andrew Jackson had agreed with the states that these Indians needed to get out of the way. And so the quote that is attributed to Jackson in this regard is that, well, Mr. Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Which is basically, you guys made a Supreme Court decision? That's cute. Super. I'm going to go do my own thing now. And that's exactly what Jackson does. In 1830, Congress is going to pass the Indian Removal Act, calling for the removal of all American Indians to the west of the Mississippi. So that's where this is going to leave us. You're going to have a lot of Indian wars as a result of this. The one that's probably the most interesting to us is the Second Seminole War. There were 3 wars fought between the United States government and the Seminole Indians here in Florida. The first one we already talked about with Andrew Jackson coming into what was then Spanish Florida to deal with the Seminole Indians around the Swanee River, and then they push into Central Florida. The Second Seminole War is the largest, longest, bloodiest, most expensive of the 3. The third one is kind of there's fighting that takes place, but a lot of it is sort of down in South Central Florida and South Florida and the Everglades, and so it's not nearly as much that takes place with the Third Seminole War. So the second one is really kind of the big blow-off, and the third one is more like an aftershock. Well, the Seminoles had been promised by what was then the territorial government of Florida that they had 20 years that they could stay in Florida, because as the new American government reminded them, hey, you guys aren't actually from Florida. You guys moved in here, sort of later. So you can't stay here forever. Eventually there's going to be settlers that are going to come in, and they're going to want to take over. So you've got 20 years. Well, when the Indian Removal Act passes in 1830 and say, okay, you guys got like 5 or 6 years. No, we've got until 1840. We can count. But whatever. It was, for the most part, the Seminole Indians, they didn't want to leave. All right. One of the other problems compounding this is the fact that there was a sort of typical, Indian kind of rivalry that they had with, non-Indian neighbors. One of the major complaints that you'll see among settlers in Florida at this point is Indians would come, and the Seminoles would come and they would take their hogs and steal their hogs. For obvious reasons, because bacon tastes awesome. So anyway, but the major sort of economic and political problem that was with this is there were a number of runaway slaves that would find their way into the Seminole encampments, and of course the Seminoles refused to hand them back over. And then you've got the bounty hunter type slave catchers that are going into Seminole territory because they don't get paid unless they bring a slave back to the plantation. And so then you've got conflicts between the slave catchers and the Indians Indians hate the slave catchers, and the slave catchers hate the Indians, and so it's a great big mess. So finally here in December of 1835, the United States Army sends a column of U.S. soldiers under the command of Major Francis Dade and they are going to march right through the middle of Seminole territory on the military road. They were allowed to go through this, but it was pretty obvious to everybody that what this was, hey, Indians, look how big and tough the American Army is. You guys, if you don't want any more of this, then you need to get out, right? And so it was a show of force. It was a show of force, and you had a number of the Seminole Indians that were rejecting treaties that had been signed by other chieftains. Much of this activity was coalescing around the young and charismatic war leader Osceola, or Osceola, as we would sort of pronounce it now, who was urging, we need to fight back. We need to fight back against these guys. They're not going to move us out of Florida without a fight. And at his urging, a fairly large group of Seminole warriors are going to ambush Major Dade's command of 108 men near what is now Bushnell, Florida, and they're going to wipe these guys out down to almost the last man. I think only 2 guys are going to escape the battle alive. And much of our information about the battle and then what happens later is one of these survivors, Ransom Clark, who's going to make it back to Fort Brooke in Tampa, and he's going to, he's shot up. He got a bullet bounce off his skull. One broke his leg, one broke his arm, one shattered his scapula in his back. And so, anyway, the dude was messed up, but he gives us the basics of what kind of happens with this. Well, as the word reaches the United States government, they declare war. They declare war on the Seminole Indians. The war itself was a pretty bitter, what we would refer to as a guerrilla struggle. You don't have a lot of big battles. It's going to consume 2 major generals of the United States that are going to come in. They're going to try to fight the Seminole Indians first in big battles, and of course the Seminoles just demur. We're not going to fight you in big battles. We're going to hide off into the swamp, and then we're going to attack you in other places where you're weak. And then you had other generals who basically the other general who comes in and says, all right, what we're going to do is break Florida up into zones. We're going to try to control all the zones with forts and patrols and things like that. Basically the same way the United States tried to keep communists out of South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And it's going to work about as well, which is to say, not at all. And eventually you're going to have a militia general who's going to come in and say, I know how to fight Indians. You don't fight the warriors, you fight their women. Yeah. You bring a war to them economically, and if they won't stand and fight for their villages, then fine, you just go and you burn the village. They run off into the woods, then you just keep them running in the woods. You just go after them. You pound them. You don't let them get anything to eat. You don't let them catch anything, catch any breath. You just keep them on the move. You keep them hungry, and you keep them driving them before you, sort of like hounds to the hunters. And in many cases, they just out and out lie to some of these people. Where there was a large group of these guys in South Florida that, oh, you guys are hungry. Oh, we've got a ship here with provisions on it. Flag of truce. You guys come aboard, and we'll feed you, and then we'll talk. We'll talk treaty, right? No, we won't capture you. We just want to feed you. And of course, people got on the ship. They raise the anchor. They sail off to the Mississippi to take these people out to Oklahoma. And so, two-thirds of the Seminoles that were in Florida at this point are going to wind up either being killed or captured. They're going to be hauled off out to Oklahoma and Arkansas, that area. The remaining third or so are going to get driven south into the Everglades. And so, to put it into perspective, it gets so bad, of course, that a lot of these Indian women are turning to their husbands and are saying, listen, we got to give up. There's no more food for us. There's no more food for the children. It was so bad that some of the black slaves that had escaped the plantations to go live amongst the Seminoles were actually leaving the Seminoles and going back to the plantation. When slavery is a better option, whatever you're doing is pretty awful. All right, so that's how bad it was getting for some of the Seminoles during the Second Seminole War. This map gives you an idea. The baby blue area, this was the treaty organization for the Seminole territory during the 1820s, 1830s, where they were supposed to stay. And we got a few scenes of this. This is our every December we put on a reenactment of Dade's battle that takes place in Bushnell. This is what soldiers in the 1830s would look like. And there's yours truly's head peeping out from around the tent there. I was younger and thinner at that point. But this is what you've got to contend with here, fighting in Florida. There are no, at this point in 1830s, 1840s Florida, there are no highways, there are no, in the interior, there are no towns, there's no cities, there's no Motel 6, right? You've got a lot of swamps, you've got a lot of cypress knees, bump up against the bellies of horses, and it's difficult to move armies through here. And of course, the Seminole Indians, they know all this territory like the back of their hand, and so they've got a significant amount of advantages in moving through the hammocks and the fields and the swamps of Florida to take the fight to the U.S. soldiers at this point. This is a real honest-to-goodness Indian in South Florida. A friend of mine is named Sawgrass, and he participates in the reenactment every December. So there's what you have here with the Seminoles. All right. We're also going to talk about some of the other Indian tribes. Not really going to talk about the Blackhawks in the north quite as much, but to give you an idea of kind of what's taking place here and how this shakes out. You get eventually this this example of what we commonly refer to as the Trail of Tears, and that is these Indians, wherever they're from, they're uprooted and they're moved out to the Oklahoma area, along with they refer to as the Trail of Tears. Now, anytime you pick up an entire civilization and you say, okay, you guys have forcibly moved somewhere else, there's going to be some death. A lot of the old, the sick, and some of the very young, they die along the way. But this is extremely sad. But at the same point, I don't want you to get the idea that the soldiers that are sort of supervising this march as these guys move westward, that it's like the Bataan Death March, where they stop for too long and they just shoot them. They're not very nice to them, all right? But it's easy to sort of get overboard with this sort of idea that they're just like butt-stroking children, with their muskets or something like that, as like a matter of course. The idea is not to exterminate them, it's to move them. And so some of them are going to die. But really, when you look at this artist painting, this doesn't look like a tribe of Indians. They've got blankets and horses, and they've got wagons and oxen, and they're all moving in sort of an organized way. This looks like a wagon train of white people that are moving out west, not red people. And so, like I said, the Cherokee especially were really pretty well civilized. They had a lot of modern amenities that you would expect in sort of 1830s America. Now, the place that they were deposited was supposed to be permanent. Nobody's ever going to want to move here west of the Mississippi River. Nobody's going to want that. Of course, that lasted 15 years before settlers started pushing into the area. But this is what takes place. And of course, when you look back at this with the Indian Removal Act, what's going on with Jackson and some of these people? And you've got a couple of schools of thought. The easiest, the sort of path of least resistance, thought-wise, is just say, well, Jackson hated Indians and he wanted to get them out of the way. And that kind of works. You also have, though, the other side of this, which is somewhat of a humanitarian side, which is if you leave these Indians completely surrounded by settlers, and the settlers want their land, there's no place to escape. That if they come in, there's a chance that all of them will be slaughtered. If we move them out of the way, then maybe we can save them. I'm not saying that's what's going on. I'm just saying that those are some of the arguments that you can make with this as well. As we've seen, the Bank of the United States is kind of a political football. You've got people that are sort of for it, you've got people that are kind of against it, and whoever gets a hold of it, it kind of has, especially as president, gets to have their say on it. Well, Jackson was thoroughly an anti-Bank of the United States guy. He found the Bank of the United States to be an anti-democratic institution. It gave these very few rich people extraordinary amounts of power over the United States money supply. And so he was opposed to it. He especially hated one of the executive directors of the bank, Nicholas Biddle, and we saw how Jackson was with people that he despised. He said, you rich guys are running everything, you're ruining it for blah, 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 blah. So in 1832, Jackson is up for re-election. And so the Congress decides to vote to authorize rechartering the Bank of the United States. And basically, they punt, right? They allow Jackson, okay, Jackson, you're going to have to make the decision because this is a political sort of, a politically charged, kind of hot potato, and we don't want to hold it because we don't want to say, for those people that hate the bank, well, all right, we're going to do this, and for those people that want the bank to continue, we don't want to say we're not going to do it, so we're just going to allow Jackson to do it. We're going to pass it, and we're going to put it on Jackson's desk. So, Jackson's opponent in 1832 was the Whig candidate, Henry Clay. Clay thought that he's got a no-lose proposition. That if Jackson signs the bill and recharters the Bank of the United States, he'd be able to run around the country campaigning. And the argument that he would make is, well, Jackson turned his back on the little guy, right? That he's not really for the farmers and the people that don't engage in big business. He signed the charter. If he vetoed it, then he'd be able to say that he doesn't want economic expansion, blah, blah, blah. So it's political kind of stuff, all right? And so he tries to use the veto that Jackson does issue. Jackson says, I don't like the bank, I don't like the way that it works, and so he vetoes it in 1832. So Clay goes around and he says, all right, Jackson vetoed this bank bill, and the bank's going to go away, and we're all going to lose our credit, and the sky's going to crash down on top of us, and so you guys need to vote for me, and he loses. So Jackson concludes that, well, I have a mandate for a second term, and basically, a lot of the campaign sort of devolved on this issue of the bank, and people voted my veto being the right one. That's the one that they liked. They liked the fact that I did not recharge the bank, and so I must be ridiculously smart. This must be the idea the American people really love. So I have a mandate to really go after the bank, to really sort of grind it into powder. Right? Now, what Jackson could have done was, as federal funds were withdrawn from this bank, eventually they would run out of money that was deposited by the federal government, and then they would just have the regular money that the bank had in it. And so you would then have a very gradual easing away from the bank here in Philadelphia being the Bank of the United States. Right? And you have a sort of a gradual transition from an official sort of government bank to being just a regular old bank, right? But Jackson said, no, I've been given this sort of authority, this mandate to go after these people, so I'm going to take on the bank, and I'm going to hammer these guys, all right? And I'm going to kill the bank very quickly rather than let it die slowly, right? Anytime you do this, all right, where you say, I'm going to make big changes to the economy in a hurry, almost always bad idea, right? Because economies like to grow over time and adapt to new changes kind of piecemeal, rather than saying, okay, when you went to bed last night, the economy was X, and you wake up this morning and now the economy is Y. It creates a great deal of uncertainty. Uncertainty creates a lot of doubt and fear, and of course fear leads to less trade. Right? Trade equals wealth, so less trade equals less wealth. The question also is, what are you going to do with all this money? You take all this money out of the bank, I guess we could just put it in Jackson's bed, at the White House. But no, Jackson had a plan for this, and of course he's trying to be democratic, that we ought to spread the money out amongst the people. And so instead of one central bank, right, that's controlled by a few, mustache-twirling evil bankers, right, we're going to see that he's going to put these into a number of smaller institutions all throughout the United States. And, of course, the question is, well, which banks? I mean, you don't have enough money to give sort of every single bank in the United States some of these federal deposits. And so, of course, he's going to pick some of these out. What criteria is he going to use? That's right, support for him in the Democrat Party. And so they earned the nickname the pet banks, right? Oh, they're the ones that Jackson likes. So these are the ones that are going to take place here. So here you can see some of the political cartoonery of the day. There's Jackson with his veto, and there's lightning striking the columns of the bank and just knocking it down. So I guess maybe it's in the wintertime when the static electricity is pretty high, but zapping them with a piece of paper. And in this one, you got the bank directors of the Bank of the United States. There is the multi-headed Hydra. And there you can see Andrew Jackson with the veto on his sword as he's going out to slay the multi-headed. And what's neat is these are all heads of actual people that were running the bank at that point. A few of them even had their names sort of stitched onto their heads so you can see who they are, right? Well, one of the nice features of having a bank in a centralized location is, with federal money in it, is federal inspectors can come in pretty easily and say, okay, we deposited this much money, do you have it? It gets a lot more difficult if it's spread out in penny packets all throughout the United States, and the United States auditors then have to keep track of all of it. And so, generally speaking, there's a significant lack of controlling authority from the central government in regards to what these banks are going to be doing, loaning this money out for whatever purposes they think of. A lot of these banks are going to make very shady deals. Some of them it's just going to be straight up risky. Some of it is going to be downright criminal, and a lot of these sort of fall in between. And they play up the fact that, hey, the federal government regards us as a safe bank, good place to put your money. Come in and do business with us because we've got federal money. They trust us. Okay, fine. But then they loan money out, especially for land sales. And in some cases, they were double or triple counting the money. In many cases, they were trying to deceive the auditors that would come in. They'd loan the money out. And it was, oh, where is it? Oh, we've got it here. And then, no, it's over there. And so, anyway, they got some shell game stuff that they're doing. The long and short of this, because if banks want to blow their money on stupid stuff, that's their own business. All right. The problem is, this is the currency, though, of the United States government. All right. And what this does is it puts the nation's money supply in extremely bad shape, because what they're doing, especially as they're loaning out the money 1, 2, 3 times what they actually have, this creates inflation. Massive, massive amounts of inflation, because you've got maybe, if you get a $100 deposit out on these people, and then you make a loan charter out with someone and say, yeah, you've got the $100, and then you've got the $100, and you've got the $100. It's a way to create inflation, because now you've got people running around thinking there's $300 being loaned out from this bank, and they're going to go there they're going to buy stuff with it. Okay, and so this is going to create a massive, massive problem. Inflation is going to soar, and so Jackson is forced to do something about that. Right, and the way that he is going to try to deal with this is one of the things that had been a major source for revenue for the United States government throughout the 1800s is the sale of public land. There was a huge amount of territory that the federal government still owned out in the western part of the United States, and it made a lot of money off of selling this to people that wanted to set up a farm or a school or a discotheque, I don't know, whatever people wanted to set up here in the 1830s. But what you would do is you would go in and you would buy this from the federal government. Well, as inflation was going up, all of a sudden everybody's buying land. They're all buying land like crazy, because now they've got a bunch of what they think is real money. And so Jackson was forced to come in and say, okay, we got to stop this. We got to stop this, and he issues an executive order called the Specie Circular. And it required that all public land sales would have to be done not with paper money issued by a bank, but actual metallic money. You come in and say, well, I've got $100 in gold. You got to give me the $100 in gold. I'm not going to, just go on some bank's word for it. Well, this halted the inflation, right? But the problem with this is you've got soaring inflation, and you've got a crash of deflation, and you've got a massive economic problem that happens as a result of that. For those of you that understand about animals, it's like taking if you're riding a horse and you're going at sort of a nice easy walk, and then you whip the thing up into just this massive gallop, and its nostrils are flaring, sweat's flying everywhere, and then you just yank it to a complete stop. That is, for the most part, what happens here. And just exactly like you would think, that doesn't sound like it would be very good for a horse. It's not, okay? It's not good for an economy either, to sort of put it through these massive swings, and you're going to have major economic dislocation that's going to take place. Remember, a lot of these banks are going to fail. They're going to take a lot of people who had legitimate deposits in their banks sort of down with them, and you're going to have an economic panic of 1837. We generally refer to different psychological terms. In the 1900s, we call them depressions. Right? This is going to be a panic. Whatever, they're all about the same. Okay, people flip out and they don't spend money, and then the economy crashes. Right? Of course, by 1837, Jackson was out of office, so there are no political repercussions for Jackson, despite the fact that he, for the most part, totally caused this. And this gives you a little bullet cartoon. It was called The Times. It's here in 1837. Give you an idea of what's going on. You got a lot of unemployed people on the streets. You got people rushing their banks, trying to get their money out before the bank closed. And of course, everybody's showing up at the bank demanding their money is going to cause the bank to close. So, you've got major problems. And of course, there is an upside. The sun is wearing glasses and a top hat. I don't know why. I didn't know that the artists took LSD in the 1830s, but why not? Right? Well, we've talked a lot about the Democrats. We haven't really talked about any opposition. And their opposition is going to come from the Whig Party. Right? This is it's borrowing a name from British politics that goes back to at least the 1600s with this. And one of the things I noticed was Jackson and his Democrats, they're well organized. They go to these nominating conventions, and they all get on the same page, and they go out and they campaign for these candidates. And then when they get elected, they turn around and they make sure that their people are taken care of. And for those of you who are engaged in team sports, you know that organized teams that practice and have good skills working with each other, they tend to win. And the Democrats tended to win. And so if you were one of these people who didn't look at Andrew Jackson and went, gosh, he's the best thing ever. If you were a political person and you were like, Jackson, I really don't agree with what Jackson's doing, what you need to do to stop him is you need to form your own organization. And generally speaking, the Whigs are going to coalesce a lot of what had been sort of the old Federalist ideas, but really they've got kind of some new ideas. Henry Clay's American system, you've got some of these other candidates who are going to pick up on some of that. But really, a lot of this is going to center around just opposition to Andrew Jackson. They felt that he was gaining too much power. They began to contest his presidency in basically every way possible. Now, if you're going to look at a straight Whig platform, all right, the Democrats would position themselves as, well, we're for limited government and constitutionalism. We're really the inheritors of Jeffersonian-style democracy. But, of course, they were totally cool with handing out jobs to all their friends and making sure that the government controlled the executive branch as strongly as possible to get their people into the court system. So they had no problem inflating the power of the federal government, just not necessarily the spending part. Well, these guys are going to favor the bigger government in regards to the spending, especially regarding internal improvements. They wanted to build roads and canals and stuff like that. They put forward the idea that the Bank of the United States needs to be brought back so that credit is available, and they were big fans of tariffs in order to generate the revenue to pay for all of this. So this is their positions. They're going to run 5 candidates for president before the Whig Party goes out of business. For those of you who are sitting here thinking, man, Whigs, I really like the sound of that. Tariffs, I'm a big fan. I'm going to vote for them. Next time I get a chance. Yeah, you can't go and vote for any Whigs today. Sorry, it's how it goes. They're going to run 5 candidates before they go out of business, and they're going to win 2 of them. So they get a 40% success rate. That's not too bad, right? Unfortunately, both of the people that they get elected to office are going to die in office. So now the first 2 times they run political candidates are going to fail, right? But after the 1830s, the United States is going to have a 2-party system right up until today. Eventually, as you can probably guess, the Whigs are going to go away. They're going to be replaced by the Republicans. But the idea you got sort of one political group, you either belong to them or go, I don't think so. You really only got one other choice here in America. And for the most part, a lot of Americans, they don't totally agree with what either one party is doing all the time. So if you're one of those kind of people who say, I really like these guys, but some of the stuff they do, it really makes me shake my head. Yeah, it just means you're an American, okay? And we've got a 2-party system, unlike a lot of countries that have a multi-party system. And so here you can see some of the things that the Whigs have to say. You've got Andrew Jackson clothed as a king. He's got the sort of the veto and the scepter in his hand. He looks like he's going to sort of brain you with it with his cane. And of course, he's standing on a ripped-up copy of the United States Constitution. So this is Whig, political propaganda. That Andrew Jackson is the king. He's not a president. He's our dictator. So anyway, this is what you do. People sort of flip out. I can't believe they said things like that about the president or about a person running against him. Or it's normal. It's okay. Don't take it too seriously. Okay. And this is a Whig campaign rally announcing when the next great Whig sort of meeting is. Right? So when we look at how this plays out over the next 4 years, you've got 2 vibrant sort of political parties, one kind of stronger than the other one, but now you have a change of these events, and they're going to land squarely on the shoulders of Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren is Jackson's vice president, and apparently Jackson just really liked Van Buren. I'm not exactly sure why. Van Buren was from the North. He was not a Southerner. I don't get the attraction from this, but actually, Jackson suggested at one point that he'll resign as president to allow Van Buren to take over when he was running for his own term, because it would be easier for Van Buren to get elected if he were already president. They decided not to do that. But Jackson does give Van Buren a very firm recommendation to the United States, and of course, a lot of people most people at this point, they identify themselves as Democrats. They're the group that's for the people. Right? Whatever that means, right? And they're going to vote for Van Buren, all right? But like I mentioned, Van Buren isn't Andrew Jackson. He's not a war hero. He's the first person to be born a citizen of the United States. He was born after 1776. All these other presidents that we had been grandfathered in. They had been born citizens of the British Empire, and then obviously become American citizens with the Declaration of Independence. But Van Buren was born after 1776, and so he was a citizen right from the moment of birth. And he's from the North. His father had been a tavern owner. He had been in business. Wasn't a farmer. He was a business guy. He was a political guy. And so he didn't really fit the same kind of mold as Andrew Jackson. And of course, as soon as he gets into office in 1837, he inherits an economic depression. Now, he's pretty well handcuffed by the Jacksonian idea of hands-off approach to government, that you don't spend a lot of money, you don't get super active, which, of course, as we've been reminded again and again, is actually the right way to go dealing with these kinds of things. But the problem with this is the right thing to do and what is popular aren't always the same thing. And this is going to be one of those kind of things. Because whenever the economy is bad, a party that's out of power can run around and say, hey, if we were in charge, things would be a lot better because we'd be doing this and this and this. And then all the good stuff would happen. That's like whenever a football team is losing, the most popular guy is always the backup quarterback. Well, if we only had him in, the guy that we got now, he sucks. And the other guy, man, I saw him in the preseason. He really wing it. You know, we'll win with that guy. Same kind of thing happens politically, right? Whenever things are going bad, the party that's out of power can run around and say whatever they want and promise that whatever they're going to put into effect is going to miraculously fix everything. That's the great thing about being out of power, is you can say whatever you want, and there aren't any actual consequences because it's all just talk. Well, as the economy gets worse, their ideas of proposing government activity to stimulate the economy is going to look more and more attractive, and that's exactly what's going to take place. Coupled with the fact that the Whigs are going to find their own sort of Andrew Jackson. They're going to find some old war horse, and they're going to run him for the presidency. And they're going to say, he's a man of the people. He's one with the farmer. It's not going to be any more true with William Henry Harrison than it was with Andrew Jackson. But again, you've got perception versus reality, and perception is what most people vote on. And so they're going to win power in Congress, and they're going to win the White House here in 1840. There are also a lot of other little events that are going to be taking place here that are really important when we look at the overall sort of political scheme. And one of the major issues with this is going to be with slavery. All right? We're gonna hit this again when we talk about manifest destiny expansion of the United States to the Pacific Ocean. But we've got to set the stage a little bit and talk about Texas. For those of you who are from Texas or have been to Texas or have heard of Texas, Texas is incredibly large and important because, of course, it's the size of 5 states. Right? We'll talk about why that is over the course of this discussion and then one of the ones later. Right? So in order to understand this, you've got to back up a little bit, and that is, at this point, Texas is still part of Mexico. Right? Mexico was part of Spain. It was part of Spain's overseas empire until 1821, when Mexico wins its independence from the Spanish. But of course, the part of Mexico that was Texas, there's nobody really living there, there's not a lot of activity, and so the Mexican government looks on it and says, we really need to stimulate some economic activity in this area. And basically what they did was they invited Americans into Texas under what they refer to as the impresario system in order to help them settle it. Now, there were some requirements. You had to become a Mexican citizen. Okay. Right? You had to become a Catholic, because that was sort of part of the requirements. And these guys aren't going to really do that. And slavery was illegal, so you had to free any slaves. Well, for those of you who forget which part of the country Texas is in, it's in the southern part, which means that it's right next to the other southern parts. And so a huge chunk of the settlers that are coming into Texas, the eastern part of what is Mexico, had slaves, and they were bringing in other settlers who had slaves, and they were settling the area, and they really weren't very interested in getting rid of their slaves. Right? More importantly, the American guys that were coming in, they didn't start thinking like Mexicans as soon as they crossed the border. They thought like Americans, which was, you're born with certain liberties, it's the responsibility of the government to defend those, and you have a say, you have the right to speak, and of course, Mexico had been nurtured under Spanish rule, which is a very hierarchical kind of government, where you get the king is at the top, and he's got a ruling council, and you got these people under him. And while we don't want to be under the king of Spain anymore, that was their sort of political system. Strong executive rule rather than representative legislative rule. So you've got these two sort of ideas about government that are starting to butt heads with each other. And these guys begin to do what Americans do when they start getting laws pressed on them from a government that they think is unresponsive. And so these laws that were coming down from Mexico City, they begin to reject them. And eventually what you'll see is the leader of Mexico at this point is a guy named Santa Anna, and he organizes this army to put down what he referred to as a rebellion in Texas. So the Texans at this point realize we're going to have to fight now. We're going to have to fight for our independence if we want to not have to do what the central government of Mexico City is telling us to do. Now, the American people, they looked at this as a struggle. Basically, it's a rerun of the American Revolution. You've got these sort of valorous Americans that are defending themselves from this oppressive government, and they're going to help them. They're going to help them through private means. The official policy of the United States government was neutrality. This is an internal matter for Mexico. We don't monkey around in the internal affairs of other countries. But in reality, they were probably rooting for the Americans, behind the table. Go, go, go. And of course, you're getting a lot of militia volunteers, of people that are pouring into Texas to be able to fight for these these Texicans on their side. And so you've got a real war that's going to break out here for Texas independence. And so they didn't refer to themselves as Texans at this point. They refer to themselves as Texicans, which is kind of cooler. I don't know. But you're going to have some big names, right? You're going to have Sam Houston. You're going to have Stephen Austin, who is neither the Bionic Man nor the pro wrestler. Different Stephen Austin. And you're going to have some people like Davy Crockett who are going to come in from Tennessee to participate in this. Well, the first major stopping point for Santa Anna's army is going to be the Spanish mission at what is now San Antonio. And if you've ever been to San Antonio, the Spanish mission, the Alamo, is still there. And it's weird because you've got this, this old sort of Spanish mission stuck right in the middle of downtown San Antonio. You've got, steel and glass buildings. You've got the very modern Riverwalk sort of giant mall that's right across the street from it. And then you've got this old Spanish mission just kind of sitting there. So it's pretty weird. But at that point, the mission was basically the only thing that was there. It had a low wall around it. You had a couple of little buildings that you could kind of fortify. And this is going to be the place where these Texans are going to try to hold off the Mexican army. Well, these Texans are under no illusions. They know what's going to happen here, that there are about 6,000 Mexicans at Santa Anna's command. They're going to be able to surround the Alamo. And basically what these guys are doing is they're not trying to win the battle. They're not telling themselves that 200 of us are going to defeat 6,000 Mexican soldiers. That's not possible. And of course, once they get surrounded, there's no way out. The goal of this is to play for time. If we hold up Santa Anna's army long enough, the longer that we hold them, the longer that it gives Stephen Austin a chance to raise an army that will be large enough to fight off the Mexicans. And so they are going to hold these guys off for almost 2 weeks. For 13 days, these Texans are going to hold off the initial assault on the Alamo. They're going to fight these guys off. They're going to drive them back. And that forces Santa Anna to stop and wait for the rest of his army to march up. And then they got to deploy, fire on them with the artillery, and then rush them all around. Okay, every single one of the Texans at the Alamo are killed. So to put this into perspective, these guys knew what they were getting into, and they were doing all this for a chance to beat them. Right? This wasn't a guarantee kind of thing that, well, if we sacrifice our lives, we know we'll win. It wasn't like that at all. We're going to give Austin a chance to raise an army. The sacrifice, it turned out, worked. Austin does manage to raise a large enough force, not quite as big as Santa Anna's army, and he's going to do a number of falling back actions, but he's going to turn the tables on him near the San Jacinto River, and he's going to rout the Mexican army. It attacks them in the middle of the day. They had no idea that the Texans were going to go from defense to offense. It catches them completely off guard. Mexican army shatters. They capture Santa Anna. They force them to sign a treaty. Long story short, Texas becomes an independent nation. Well, the United States government, which of course throughout this period, we're not involved, we don't care who wins, go Texas. Hook 'em horns, or something like that. Anyway, go Texas, we want this to happen. And of course, as soon as Texas declares its independence, the United States jumps in, yep, you guys are independent, you're an independent country. Yep, we recognize you. You guys are independent, you're not part of Mexico anymore, of course. Now, all these Texans, let's face it, they're Americans, all right? They haven't been living in Mexico for very long. Just a few years, and they turn around and say, oh, we got an independent nation. We're right next door to the United States. Their view on government is exactly the same as what our view of government is. Really, we ought to be a part of the United States. And so they invite the United States to annex Texas and make it part of the USA. The problem with this is, and this looks like a no-brainer, it's huge territory, size of 5 states, just this massive amount of territory, the economic expansion to the westward, and they're just offering it up for free. Easy. And you don't even have to get rid of a bad system of government that you disagree with. In Texas, they're setting up the same kind of, federalist republic that you agree with. So this looks like a just easy decision. The problem is, though, slavery. As soon as anybody would sort of bring, I think we really ought to add Texas to the Union. Well, we're adding another slave state. Or if you break it up into normal-sized state components, maybe have as many as 5 slave states. We don't want more slavery here in the Congress, do we? And of course, the people of the North, no, I don't want that. This is going to stall the annexation for basically 16 years. That these guys are going to, it's going to be until 1846 that finally these guys are going to come in, or I'm sorry, 8 years. And they say, okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll annex Texas. So here's some scenes. This is the fighting that takes place here in the Alamo. The outer wall is these guys are fighting off a much larger Mexican army, what it looked like. And then this is an artist's rendition of the charge of the Texans here at the Battle of San Jacinto as they kind of drive them backwards and they catch them off guard. This is a battle map to give you an idea of kind of how this worked itself out. There's the San Jacinto River. This is the Mexican army that had kind of pushed itself up. They were in a defensive position, but of course they were not expecting an American or a Texan attack. And so these guys, they sort of hit them in the front, and then they kind of outflank them with the cavalry. They also move their infantry through the woods, and so they kind of hit them on three sides all at once. And it really catches them off guard because the Texans, I mean, they're supposed to be on defense. They're not supposed to be out here. And so anyway, Santa Anna, he's going to wind up having another escape. A bunch of these guys are pushed backwards. Long story short is the Texans are going to win, right? So when we diagram out, we sort of dissect the election here that takes place in 1840 for the presidency. The big issue was Texas annexation. Are we going to, if you're going to elect president, sir, or you're going to re-elect president, sir, are you going to ask the Congress to pass an annexation bill for Texas? And of course, both parties. Next question, right? They don't want to come down on one side or the other about Texas annexation, because if they say, oh yeah, I'm for it, then basically everyone in the North is always a pro-slavery guy. He's a slaver, right? And of course, if you say, no, I really don't think we should annex Texas, then you got a lot of people in the South going, oh, you're against slavery, and so we're seeing how explosive already the slavery issue is getting to be. And so these political candidates, generally speaking, they stay out of it, which is just, it needs due consideration. They give one of those politician non-answers, So the real issue, though, that's going to come into play here is the economic depression. The economic depression is really hurting Van Buren. He looks like he's out of touch. He's able to be cast as kind of this rich northerner. And, of course, the Whigs, they are going to find their formula for victory. They've got now what they refer to as a hoity-toity New Yorker, right? Send him back home to old Kinderhook is what they say. The Kinderhook, New York is where he's from. And instead, you should vote for our guy. He's a backwoods general. He's a frontiersman. He fought the Indians. He's a lot like Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was old Hickory. William Henry Harrison, he's young Hickory, right? Despite the fact that he's really not all that young, right? And so this guy was somebody that supported the Whig platform, which is, of course, what they're going to get behind. So the Democrats get to watch as the Whigs run this popular quote-unquote backwoodsman to victory. William Henry Harrison was no more of a sort of frontier backwoodsman, clearing land with his own two hands as Andrew Jackson was. Okay, he was a rich guy. He had servants. They did all this stuff for him. But what we're seeing ever increasingly is that being poor becomes popular. William Henry Harrison doesn't run around talking to people about how, well, you should vote for me because I've had a lot of success. I'm really wealthy, and so that proves that I really know what I'm doing here. So you should vote for me. You don't see that. Oh, I'm poor, that kind of thing. And you'll see that ever increasingly throughout this period, the ability to be able to identify with the common man, whether it's true or not, in this case it's an or not, with Abraham Lincoln, it's a sort of, kind of. But you'll see, guys like Daniel Webster, U.S. Senator, he's going to get up, in the floor of the Congress and well, I can't say that I was born in a log cabin, but my older brother was. Well, who cares? I mean, why does where you were born have anything to do with whether you're going to be a good senator or not, a good political candidate or not? And so what you're going to see is these guys are going to scramble to show their earthy roots, how they really understand. Back when I used to have to stack wood when I was a kid, that kind of thing. And most of it's bunk, none of those people by the time they're going to be president. We've never had a poor president. We never had a poor person elected president. It's never once happened. You've had some, like Abraham Lincoln, who were born, in log cabins. Herbert Hoover, who was, I think he was born above a gas station. He was born in, if not poverty, definitely in sort of low circumstances. But by the time they're president, we've never had a poor person elected. Abraham Lincoln was a corporate attorney by the time he was elected president. And he wasn't super rich, but he wasn't, still living in a one-room house either. So what you're seeing here is this idea of identification with the poor is incredibly important. You're also going to see the 1840 campaign really modernizes this sort of mass campaign, mass democracy. You'll see slogans that are going to go out. And probably the most popular of the sort of political slogans is going to be one of the first ones. General Harrison was known for his battle at Tippecanoe, and his running mate was John Tyler. So they come up with really maybe the best political slogan of all time: Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Possibly could only be challenged by Dwight Eisenhower, who was known by Ike, with these buttons with his head on it smiling, and it says, "I like Ike." These are tough slogans to put down. You'll also see stump speeches. These guys, they would come to these towns, they would literally, in some cases, stand on a stump. They would talk about how awesome their candidate was for their party, and you should go out and vote for them. They also had voter parties. There's a reason that they're called parties. It's not just, well, it's a party of people. They get together and they have like-minded. No, I mean, like, in some cases, you need to vote for my guy. Why? Because I'm giving away free barbecue and free beer at my house. You guys come over and we'll have a political party. And that's exactly what they would do. They would have these little community barbecues, and you'd have local candidates, and you'd have national candidates, and they would all get sort of liquored up together. Well, Harrison is going to win. He's going to win. He's the popular candidate. People are going to identify with him. People are going to blame Van Buren for the Depression. So the Whigs are going to win. He's going to go out on a very cold day. He gives the longest inaugural address ever recorded in presidential history. He does it without his hat off. He does it without his hat on to show his respect for the crowd, right? And of course, he promptly dies from pneumonia 31 days into his term, because standing outside talking in the snowy, wintry, spring Washington air when you're an old dude without your hat on is ridiculously stupid. So he's going to win, and all of a sudden, and Tyler too becomes way more important than you would normally figure. So here you can see some campaign poster action for William Henry Harrison. There he is. He's a general, and there are a lot of pictures of him, with his military guys. He's in his uniform. But you also see, this is his farm, and this is his farmhouse, and this is him, meeting with his neighbors and drinking sort of hard whiskey from most of that's all manufactured. Okay, the idea that William Henry Harrison sort of was living in a log cabin, no. All right, this is him. All right, and if the expensive suit doesn't give it away, the fact that his hair is combed, should definitely tell you this guy was not ridiculously poor. So that's the end of this section.